All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsor, TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Tevet, to thank Yoel Sara Kelman for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in honor of the birth of their daughter, Oriya Tahel, that all of those davening for this special bracha should have their tefilos answered b'karov. To thank Teri Czinn for dedicating all the Sherman Drushos this month in honor of their grandchildren, Adin, Tzvi, and Naftali, Moshe. And to thank Shirley Elbaum Family for dedicating the Shurim and Drushos this month, the commemoration of the yahrzeit of Gerald Elbaum, Yaakov Kopel, R Avraham Menachem. To thank our Day of Learning sponsor, Hoffman, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of her grandfather's yahrzeit, Baruch ben Moshe Zalman, and to thank Fran Hisler for the dedication of the Day of Learning, nishmas, her beloved father, Avraham ben Sender Malka, on the occasion of his 20th yahrzeit. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And above say with that, let us begin. We have a very exciting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is your test 19. We are picking up on Yud Ches Amud Beis 18b. We're actually picking up at the Tanur right across from Tosfos Kan Consum. Right across. Okay, I'll go quickly. Tanur Hishmit Basofra Osios Psukim V'Karan HaKorei Kimiturgam and Avatargim Yatsa. Suppose it's an interesting case. We'll have to define exactly what it means. But if the Sofer went ahead and Hishmit literally means either he left out or he messed up, right? Either words or psukim, and therefore again, the Balkorei of the Megillah read them kimiturgaman, like a turgaman. What does it mean? What was the job of the turgaman? The job of the turgaman was to translate things. The turgaman did his translations, balpeh, which essentially, what the Gemara is talking about here is the following case. Imagine you're reading from a Megillah, and the Sofer left out a bunch of psukim, or a couple of words. So the Balkorei is well versed. He just reads what's missing, balpeh, to which the Gemara says, Yatsa, yo yotze. The Gemara says, really? Meisvei hayuba osios mitushtashos o mikuros. If you have letters that were smudged, or letters that were torn, imri shuma nikar, if the outline of the letter is recognizable, kshera, then ultimately the Megillah is kasher. Ve'im lav psula, but ultimately, if not, it's pasan. I will say, what do you see from this brisa? You can have letters that are a little bit smudged or a little bit ripped, but what? They need to be there. That contradicts what we just said before, because the previous prices seem to indicate that even if the letters are missing, halacha l'maisa, the Megillah is still good. Lo kashya, habekula, habemitzasa. The Gemara says it's not a contradiction. It depends. Is the Megillah missing? Literally, again, bekula, and I will say kula doesn't have to mean all of it. Rather, what does kula mean? A majority of it. One case is talking about a situation where the Megillah is missing the majority of the letters. The other case is only when there are a couple of letters missing here and there. Ten Rabbanon, Hishmit Bahakori Pasik Echad, Lo Yomar Ekras Kula, Va'achar Kach Ekras Osa Pasik. Supposed to listen to this. What happens if the Balkori forgot a pasuk? Right, it could happen. He got mixed up. There was a very laboring Haman. Right, he went ahead and he messed up. He skipped the pasuk, and then he only realizes afterwards he skipped it. So he shouldn't say, you know what? Let me finish up, and then I'll go back and read the pasuk that I missed. Ella Kore me osa pasuk ve'elach. Rather, I will say if the Balkori realizes that he missed the pasuk, what's the halacha? He's got to go back to the place where he messed up and continue reading from there. Nichnas lebeis hakneses umatzat tzibur shekaru chatzia. This is a great case. Let's say you come to shul late, Rahman al-Islam. Right? So let's say, what happens? The person comes late and they missed, let's say, the first chapter of the Megillah. So a person says, okay, you know what, not a big deal. What will I do? A person can't say, Ekra chatzia matzibur. Let me just catch, right? Let me start with the tzibur right now where they are. Right? I'll start where they are. V'achakach ekra chatzia. And then I'll read the other half on my own. Or I'll catch the first chapter of the second minyan, right? It doesn't work. Ella kore osam etchilas ariatzov. Rather, I will say again, one must read the Megillah from beginning to end. Now, I will tell you in that particular. I'm sorry. So I'm saying good. This, of course, remember, if you come to shul and you happen to have your own klaf, right? So technically speaking, you could read on your own and catch up with the tzibur. Let's say the Baal Korah is very slow. So technically, you could come, read from your own klaf, catch up, and then be yotzi like that. That works. What I can't do, the Mishnah is saying the Gemara is saying over here is, read part of it with one tzibur and then the previous part. In other words, Remember, it's essentially what it's saying is you can't read the Megillah out of order. So therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, you have to read the Megillah in order. So if you came late, if you have your own cloth, you could read and catch up. But if you don't have your own cloth, you really have to wait for a second minyan in order to be able to hear the Megillah in its entirety. Good. Misnamnem yatsa. If you read the Megillah misnamnem, dozing, you are yotze. Hechidai misnamnem. What's misnamnem? We've had this many times. Amar Ravashi, nim below nim, tir below tir. You are awake but not fully awake, asleep and, or I should say, asleep and not fully asleep, awake but not fully awake. The karu levani, somebody calls you, you'll answer. Velo yada la dure svara. But if somebody asks you a deeper question, you don't know how to answer with, you don't know how to answer with a deeper answer. So the Gemara says, "V'chi mitkuru le mitkar." But when someone reminds you of something, you'll be reminded. Okay, so I think we all know what this particular state is. Right? Many of us spend most of our lives in this state. But the idea over here is that a person is kind of, awake but not good. Misnamne. Says the Gemara. So we'll say, so this is actually very interesting that the Mishnah says, listen to this case. If a person is writing, kosa means writing, darsha means learning, magia means fixing or correcting. So in that case, in kivin libo yotza, if while you're doing these processes, you have kavanah to be yotze, the mitzvah of Megillah, you're yotze. Says the Gemara, I don't understand, heichi dami, what's the case? Either kamasader psuka, the kasav law, ki kivin libo maihavi al pehu. So we'll say, I don't understand. If we're literally talking about a case where I'm writing a Megillah as I'm reading, in other words, I'm writing the pasuk and reading the pasuk, that's kore al peh. Because the pashtus, the way that sounds like is, I'm the sofer / bal kore, right? Could I write it down? That's al peh, right? That's by heart. So how does that work? Ella the kasa psuka, the correlate. No, rather what it must mean is, you write a pasuk and then you read it. So right, I write down that whole pasuk and then I read it. The Gemara says, Umi yatsa, still that doesn't work. Also, we're going to see the next Mishnah. There's a machlokes. How much of the Megillah do you have to read in order to be yotzei? So we're going to see it's a machlokes. We pass and you have to read the Megillah in its entirety. But even according to the opinion who says you only have to read part of it, we'll discuss which part. Everyone agrees that even if you don't have to read the Megillah in its entirety in order to be yotzei, what do you need? A fully written Megillah. That's for sure. To which the Gemara says, so how could it be that I'm writing a pasuk, reading it, writing a pasuk and reading it, I have an incomplete Megillah? Ella, the mancha Megillah kamei, the kari lemine psuka, the kasavla. Now they will say, what's the case in the Mishnah? The case in the Mishnah is like this. I have a complete Megillah. Right? I have a complete Megillah sitting right next to me. And what am I doing? I'm copying from that Megillah, right? And I'm writing a new Megillah, right? The kari le psuka, the kasavla. So essentially, what I have is as follows. I have a full Megillah. I read the pasuk from the full Megillah, and then I copy it into my new Megillah, right? And the Mishnah says that works. And I will say, again, interestingly enough, it works. Why? Because where am I reading from? A complete Megillah. Now, you're supposed to think to yourself, of course, why wouldn't that work? So remember again, the havamina that it wouldn't work is because I'm actively engaged in writing a Megillah as opposed to fully vested or fully involved in reading the Megillah. So you might have thought that type of distracted reading is not a proper reading. Kamash malon it is. So the Gemara says, Leima Masei Le R Avraham Menachem. So this supports the idea that in general, when writing Kisvei Kodesh, you cannot write Kisvei Kodesh by heart. Right? You must be copying from a fully complete text, and this seems to support that idea. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily Dilma is the Isrami le Isramuye. Maybe not. Maybe it just happens to be that this case is where you had a fully completed Megillah in front of you. But Eina Chinami, not for Hilchos Megillah purposes, but for Hilchos writing Kisvei Kodesh purposes, you don't have to write from a fully completed text. Okay? Gufa, Amra, Shabbos says, discuss this. Gufa, Amra, Rabbi Baruch, Amra Yochanan. You're not allowed, we'll say, when you're writing Kisvei Kodesh, you're writing a Sefer Torah, you're writing a Megillah, you can't write it bal peh. You can't write it by heart. You have to write it copying it out of a different, complete sefer. So Meisvei, I'll ask a kasha on that. We'll say, watch this. Rav Shimon Elazar, Ma'aseh Rabbi Meir, Shalach la'aber shana ba'asya. One time, Rav Shimon Elazar went to declare a leap year in the city of Asya. V'lo haya sham Megillah. And in Asya, he didn't have a Megillah. Because remember again, which month do you always declare as a leap month, as the additional month? Adar. So he went to Asya, and I guess he was stuck in Asya for Purim, and he did not have a Megillah with him. And what did he do? V'kasva milibo. He wrote it by heart. So he wrote down a Megillah by heart. V'kara. And he read it. So I will say, so what do you see over here? You see from here that you can write down a Megillah, right? You can write Kisvei Kodesh, even without copying from a fully written text. To which the Gemara says, no. Am Rabbi Abba Shani Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is different. Demekayim bei va'afapecha yashiru negdecha. So we'll say, which literally means afapecha, your pupils, your eyes, right? Yashu negdecha will be straight in front of you. What does this mean? So we'll say, Amrali Rabbi Bar Chama Rabbi Yirmiyah midifti mai va'afapecha yashiru negdecha. Amr elu divrei Torah. This refers to Torah. So we'll say this lashon of afapecha yashir einecha means you see things exactly as they are. You see things exactly as they are. You have clarity. Torah is clear for you. Hisif einecha bo ve'einenu. Because it will say, as the pasuk says, literally what ends up happening is, if you close your eyes, it is no longer. So I will say, I just want to point out what's happening over here. These psukim, the Gemara's understanding over here, are both a reference to Torah. So Shlomo Melech writes in Mishlei, Einecha lenochach yabitu, afapecha yashir negdecha. So Shlomo is saying that when a person has Torah, they have clarity. So I will say, we know this, by the way. When I learn, right, and I'm serious about my learning, committed to my learning, I see the world in a different way. And I see life in a different way. And I see myself in a different way. And I have a certain level of clarity in life that I have when I'm not learning. On the flip side, Shlomo says, also Torah, hisif einecha bo ve'einenu. Literally, again, you could blink your eyes and it's gone. See, I will say, the great anomaly of spirituality is you could work on something for years to amass it, and then you could blink and lose it. In other words, we know this. This is the way Ruchnius works. You will say it's not true. Any other skill that you work on to build up, if you have it and you acquire it, you hold on to it. Spirituality is the kind of thing you can work for years. One misstep, right? One misstep, one mistake, and I could lose everything. It doesn't mean I can't regain it, but I could lose it. I could lose my way. Don't we experience this all the time? I'm on such a good trajectory. I'm doing everything I need to do. I'm living the way I need to live. I'm keeping my yetzer hara in check. And then I make a mistake. I make a misstep. I do something wrong. I fall off the spiritual wagon. And I feel like all of the growth that I had up until this moment, it just evaporated. Or the same thing with Torah. A person has a commitment to Torah, but then I don't honor the commitment for a couple of days. Whatever it is, whatever, and I lose that momentum. It's the great anomaly of spirituality. If you blink, if you close your eyes for a moment, you could lose everything that you worked so hard to gain. In any event, in this particular situation, what the Gemara is saying about Rabbi Meir, right? Rabbi Meir had absolute clarity of Torah. So because he had absolute clarity of Torah, he was able to record the Megillah Baal Peh. Normally you shouldn't do it. You should copy from a text. Rabbi Meir has such clarity, he could copy it even by heart. Rav Chisda Ashkel Rav Chananel, the Avakasa Sar Shalom and Aksav. So Rav Chisda found Rav Chananel, who was writing down Svarim, but he wasn't copying from a text. He was doing it by heart. Amar lei ru'uya kala Torah kuli kasev al picha. The truth is, so listen to this, Rav Chisda said to Rav Chananel, the truth is, you are fit to write down the entire Torah. You're fit. However, alakach amru chachamim aser lichtov os acha shalom and aksav. But what are you going to do? Chazal said, you're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to do it. So the Gemara says, now the fact that Rav Chisda said to Rav Chananel that you are fit to go ahead and write down the entire Torah Baal Peh, Miyushar means that Rav Chananel had perfect vision of Torah. And yet, what do we see? Rabbi Meir Kasav, So what's going on over here? You just said from the Rabbi Meir's story, that Rabbi Meir went to go ahead and declare the new month in Asya, that he wrote down a Megillah Baal Peh. Why was he allowed to do that? Because he had such clarity of Torah. Yet, when Rav Chisda finds Rav Chananel, Rav Chisda says to Rav Chananel, you too, Rav Chananel, possess such clarity of Torah, but you still can't write down Svarim Baal Peh. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says there's a simple answer. Shas hadchak shani, which I seem to be the answer from the beginning. The Rabbi Meir case is not a good raya. Why is it not a good proof? It was a shas hadchak. Both was extenuating circumstances. Remember, he's stuck in Asya without a Megillah. Why does the whole story start? Right? Why does the whole story start? The whole story starts because he doesn't have a Megillah. So he doesn't have a Megillah. That's why he's writing it down Baal Peh. Okay, extenuating circumstances. Someone who has clarity of Torah is permitted to write it down. But in any other case where you don't have those extenuating circumstances, you don't have the license to write Baal Peh. Incredible. Abaye shari le-debei Rabbi Chabu le-michtav tefillin mezuzah shel menaksav. So it was very interesting. Abaye allowed the scribes of Bar Chavu to go ahead and write down tefillin and mezuzos Baal Peh. Right? We're not copying from a text. Kiman, ki aitana, tisani Rabbi Yirmiyah Mishra Rabbeinu, tefillin mezuzos nichtavo shel menaksav. So I will say, tefillin and mezuzos don't have to be written from a text. Now, I will say, now what's the logic behind that? Because first of all, they're short, and also everyone is familiar with those parshios. Because they are familial parshios, they do not have to be copied from an established text. Vein tzrichos sirtut. Furthermore, again, when writing the parshios of tefillin and mezuzos, you don't need to etch in the lines like you need by a Sefer Torah or by Megillah. V'hilchasa, and I will say this indeed is the halacha. Tefillin and tzrichos sirtut. Number one, tefillin don't require etched lines in the parchment. Mezuzos tzrichos sirtut, but mezuzos do. Idi v'idi nichtavo shel menaksav. And ultimately, again, I gave away the punchline. Both of them can be written even Baal Peh. The Sofer can write it Baal Peh. My taima migras grisen. What's the reason, Rabbi saying? Because people are familiar with the parshios. So because people know these parshios, therefore Allah Chalamayis, you can even read it Baal Peh. Incredible. Let's go back there. Because remember again, the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, there are certain types of inks you are not allowed to use for the Megillah. So the Mishnah says, Sam is Sama. These are all the forbidden inks. Sam is Sama, right? Sikra, Amara, Barachana, Sakarta, or Sakrasa. So Sikra is some type of reddish ink. So Sakrasa Shema. Kumos is Kuma. What's Kumos? It's Kuma, which is sap, top of your test. Kan Konsum. What's Kan Konsum? Charsa du Ushbachi. It's shoemaker's black polish. Right? The Gemara says, so I will say those are all the types of forbidden inks, ultimately because they don't endure. Now remember again, the Mishnah also said you could only write a Megillah on cloth, as opposed to diphthera and niyar, which you're not allowed to use. What's diphthera? Dimaliach v'kamech v'lo office. Well, it's very interesting. At least historically, the way they used to make parchment, Rabbi say, was that you would go and you would take the parchment and you would treat it with a solution of water and flour, and then you would coat it afterwards with gallnut juice. So diphthera is unfully processed parchment. In other words, that ultimately was treated with the water and flour solution, but halacha l'maisa not with the gallnuts. What's niyar? Niyar is machka, which is translated here as papyrus. So Rashi says over here, it's min asavim asu adei devex. This is interesting. Papyrus is paper made of herbs, or I should say of grass. Min asavim, different types of grass that are compressed together. Okay, so you can't use that for Megillah. Beautiful. Ache take suva ashuris. So remember again, the Megillah, the Mishnah said that the Megillah has to be written in ashuris, has to be written in Hebrew and Hebrew script. Kich savam v'chiz manom. Good. Ala sefer b'dio, on a piece of parchment and with dio. Minalat asik ksiva. We're supposed to make a gzir shava. Ksiv hacha v'tichtov Esra Malka. It says over here that Esra Malka wrote down the Megillah. Uksiv hasam vayomer lahem Baruch mipiv yikara. I'm sorry. Vayomer lahem vayomer lahem. Sorry. In Yirmiyahu. Vayomer lahem Baruch mipiv yikra elai eis kol hadvarim ha'ela v'ani kosef al hasefer ubidio. So we'll say, interesting enough, you have this pasuk from Yirmiyahu, and the pasuk from Yirmiyahu says that whenever you see the word ksiva, what does ksiva mean? Basefer, which means on parchment, and dio, which means proper ink. Beautiful. But says the Mishnah, such exciting Gemara. Says the Mishnah, ben ir shahalach lekrach. This is a great case. Ben ir shahalach lekrach, ben krach shahalach leir. So let's listen to this case. What I remember, going back to the beginning of Maseches Megillah, like Megillah 101, Daf Beis Amud Aleph. What's the halacha? So remember again, unwalled cities read on the 14th. Walled cities read on the 15th. So watch this case. Ben ir shahalach lekrach. Shabbos say, let's say you have someone who lives in an unwalled city who goes to a walled city, or ben krach shahalach leir, or a person who lives in a walled city ultimately goes to an unwalled city. So we'll say, what's the shaila? What's the shaila? When do I read the Megillah? When do I read the Megillah? So it says the Mishnah, it depends. Im asid lachzor limkomo. If ultimately you're going to go home, right, for Purim, you're going to be home for Purim in where you live, kore kim komo, then you read in accordance with the minhag of your hometown. I will say, we'll see exactly how this plays out. Ve'im lav, but if you're not going to be going home for Purim, then kore imahen, you read in accordance with the reading of the city in which you're in. So I'll say, interesting halacha. Umehechon ad kore adam. Again, we'll define that in just a moment. We just mentioned this before. How much of the Megillah do you have to read in order to be Yotzei? So says the Gemara. Remeir says you have to read the entire Megillah. Rabbi Huda Omer mi'ish Yehudi. Rabbi Huda says, we'll say from the section Ish Yehudi Aya b'Shushan Abira when we are first introduced to Mordechai, which again is the beginning of the second chapter. Okay, so machlokes, how much of the Megillah do you have to read? So really, it's just the machlokes of do you have to read the first chapter or not. So it says the Gemara. Rabbi Yossi has a third opinion. Me'achar hadvarim ha'ela. So we'll say this is actually chapter 3 in the Megillah. This talks about again when Achashverosh elevated Haman. Vayechar dvarim ha'ela kiva melech Achashverosh as Haman. So we'll say three-way machlokes. First opinion, entire Megillah. Second opinion from when we're introduced to Mordechai. Third opinion from when we're introduced to Achashverosh. Beautiful. So we'll say let's focus on the first part of the Mishnah. Amar Rava. So let's remember again, first part of the Mishnah, you have someone who lives in one city. Let's say again, Ben Ir Shalach Lakrak. So someone who lives in an unwalled city finds himself in a walled city. So we'll say, so what's the shaila? So think about this for just a moment. Let's see. The Gemara says Amar Rava, Lo shono elisha asid lachzar belele yudalid. We'll say, when does this shaila come up? This shaila comes up is if you plan on going home the night of the 14th. Let me frame this for you in the easiest way. So we'll say, so now watch this. Let's say I live in Yerushalayim. One day I will be Zocha. I live in Yerushalayim, which means that I am a Ben Tesvav. I read Megillah on the 15th. But now I find myself in Tel Aviv. I'm doing Kiruv, right? I find myself in Tel Aviv, right? So what happens? I find myself in Tel Aviv. So now I'm in Tel Aviv on the night of the 14th. So what's my shaila? In Tel Aviv, everybody's going ahead and what? Going to shul for Mikra Megillah. So the shaila is, do I have to go to shul or not for Mikra Megillah? So the Gemara says, everything depends on where am I going to be the morning of the 14th. Where am I going to be the morning of the 14th? If at the end of the day, I'm going to be leaving town before the morning of the 14th, then I don't celebrate Purim with the people of Tel Aviv. Instead, I'll celebrate when I get back to Yerushalayim. But if I'm going to be in Tel Aviv still on the morning of the 14th, even though again I'll be back in Yerushalayim by the 15th, halacha l'maisa, I celebrate with Tel Aviv. So essentially what the Gemara is saying is everything is dependent on where you're going to be the morning of Purim. The morning of Purim. I will say this goes back to what we said before, that the Ikar reading of the Megillah is by day. Right? That's the Ikar reading. So wherever you're going to be by day, that determines your obligation. So it says the Gemara, Lo shona elisha asid lachzar b'leili yudalid. Aval ein asid lachzar b'leili arba'asar korei mine. So I will say, this is interesting. When do we say that you should read like wherever you are, in accordance with the minhag where you are? That's assuming you're going to be in your particular location on the morning of the 14th. But if you're not going to be there in the morning of the 14th, then halacha l'maisa, you read in accordance with your minhag. We'll say, look at Rashi for just a moment. Elisha asid lachzar b'leili avasar. Or I should look at previous Rashi. Lo shanu, quickly. Lo shanu, the ben krak shalach le'ir, va'asid lachzor l'mkomo kori b'chamisha savalavar. So when do we say that if a ben krak, right, someone who lives in Yerushalayim, is now in Tel Aviv, that if he's going to go home, ultimately, again, he reads in accordance with Yerushalayim and not Tel Aviv, ela sha'asid lachzor b'leila b'asar. In kodem amod hashachar yotza min ha'ir. If I'm leaving Tel Aviv before dawn on the 14th, who diktani shenazarach likros imam b'leili yudalet. Afa pi she'odenu sham hoilu biyom lo yi yasham ein ze afilu pruz ben yomo. So I'll say ultimately again. Here's what the Gemara is saying. If I live in Yerushalayim, but I'm going to be in Tel Aviv on the day of the 14th, then I am what's called a ben pruz or a ben pruz ben yomo. I am a one-day resident of an unwalled city. If you are in an unwalled city on the morning of the 14th, you read Megillah with them. So the Gemara says, but if I'm not going to be there on the morning of the 14th, then halacha l'maisa, I read in accordance with my domicile, with my home. Good. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Amina Allah. So how do you know this? How do you know this? So the chsev alkin hayuhudim aprozim yoshem ba'arei aprozos. So listen to this. So because the Megillah says, therefore the Jews who live in this, right, the Jews of the cities who dwell in the cities. What does that mean? It said the Jews Jews of the cities. Why does it have to say who dwell in the cities? Hakamash malon de pruz ben yomo nikra pruz. So it's very interesting. It teaches us that what? That you could be a one-day resident of an unwalled city. How can you be a one-day resident of an unwalled city? If you find yourself the morning of the 14th in an unwalled city, even though you yourself live in a walled city, you celebrate Purim like them. To which the Gemara says, Ashkechan pruz. So we'll say, okay, I got it. So now I understand, if I live in a walled city, but I find myself in an unwalled city, on the day of the 14th, I have to read in accordance with the unwalled city. However, mukaf minalan, we'll say, I don't know that the reverse is true as well. Let's say I live in an unwalled city. And halacha l'maisa, so I'll say I live in Tel Aviv, and now I'm visiting Yerushalayim. So now, how do I know that the same halacha applies, I will say? It's all dependent, where am I going to be on the morning of the 14th? If at the end of the day, on the morning of the 14th, I'm still going to be in Yerushalayim, so I will say, so where do I celebrate Purim? How do I celebrate Purim? Right? In Yerushalayim on the 15th, assuming that I'm still going to be staying there. Right? But Lamaisa, again, I don't know that the reverse applies as well. So which the Gemara says, Svarahu. It's a Svara. Mi de pruz ben yomo karui pruz, mukov ben yomo kari mukov. We'll say if you could be a one-day resident of an unwalled city, then what? You could be a one-day resident of a walled city. So I will say, if you take a quick look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, Rashi says, Aval in asid. You see that Rashi? So Rashi says, if you skip down a little bit in there, V'hu Adin, leben ir shalach lekrak. Just look at this quick case. The same halach is what we just read. If someone who lives in a walled city, someone who lives in an unwalled city, goes to, I live in Tel Aviv, but now I find myself in Yerushalayim. Im asid lachzor. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. It's not about the 14th, it's about the 15th. Im asid lachzor belele tesvav, shelo yehe sham biyom tesvav, lo havim buka. So I will say, the same halacha that applies to an unwalled city applies to a walled city. So remember again, in an unwalled city, what is everything dependent on? What is everything dependent on? Where you're going to be the morning of the 14th. In a walled city, what is everything depend on? Where are you going to be the morning of the 15th? Right? Same. So the Rashi says, "Shelo yesham biyom tesvav lo havi mokaf liyomo v'korei biyudalid ki chovos mikamo va'afa pi shehu bikrach." So we'll say, this is very important. Listen to this case. The second case is a little bit more confusing than the first. In this case, we'll say, I live in Tel Aviv. I am in Yerushalayim. Right? So let's assume, by the way, that I'm coming to Yerushalayim already on the night of the 14th. So I'll say, so now again, I live in Tel Aviv. If I was home, I'd be reading the Megillah that night. But now I'm in Yerushalayim. So what do I do on the night of the 14th in Yerushalayim? So we'll say, what does it depend on? Where am I going to be the morning of the 15th? If I'm going to be in Yerushalayim, so then that year I'm going to celebrate Purim like Yerushalayim. But if I'm not going to be in Yerushalayim on the morning of the 15th, so we'll say, when do I read Megillah? On the 14th. So we'll say, this is an interesting case. So you could have a situation where a person in Yerushalayim is reading the Megillah on the 14th of Adar. Some good Shabbos table trivia. When can you ever, not trivial, you understand what I mean. Very important. But we'll say, so again, so you could have a person who's in Yerushalayim, but still reading on the 14th. When can you have a situation like that? I live in Tel Aviv, I'm visiting Yerushalayim now, but I'm leaving before the morning of the 15th. If that's the case, I'm going to read the Megillah on the 14th in the morning and the 14th at night and the 14th in the morning. But again, if I plan on staying in Yerushalayim through the 15th, or I'll be there the morning of the 15th, I read like Yerushalayim. Incredible. Amar Rava. Ben Kfar Shehalach Le'ir, Ben Kachu, Ben Kach Koreiman. So we'll say, now there is a third case, which is interesting, which is what about if you have a villager? So we'll say, because remember again, we're speaking about two categories of people, right? Talking about people who live in a city, a walled city, and an unwalled city. There is technically a third category, which are the villagers. You also remember again, what do the villagers have the right to do? They have the right to move to the closest market day, right? To the closest Monday or Thursday. So listen to this case. What about Amar Rava Ben Kfar Shehalach Le'ir? So we'll say, if you listen to this, if you have a villager who went to a city, Ben Kachu Ben Kach Koreiman. Either way, he reads like the city, unwalled city. My timer, hi kibnei ir by the mikri, v'rabbanon hu da'akilu ala kfarim k'dei sheyispeku mayim mozon achim shebekrachim. So also listen to this, because the villager. I'll say, what is a village halachically? What is a village really like? What is a village like? An unwalled city. The only reason why a village has a license to move around its reading is because Chazal were makel on them in order to free them up on Purim, since they're providing food and drink to the larger cities. However, that license to move your day of reading is only when you are in the village. But if you're in the city, ultimately again, kibnei ir ba'ila mikre. If you're in the city, then mamash you are treated like a resident of the city. Incredible. Abai says, 1 second, ben krach shalach li'ir, ben kachu, ben kach kore imahen. Sabai says, if you have a resident of a city, right, a walled city, that went to an unwalled city, ben kach, either way he reads like the unwalled city. So ben kach kori kim komo. He reads like his locale. Ben krach sagadaitcha, bim osid lachsor talya milsa. I will say 1 second, halacha, we just said before, if you live in a walled city, you come to visit an unwalled city, everything is dependent on when you plan on leaving. Elalav ben kfar, ultimately, again, rather it means a villager. Ulav tarutzi mitarasta tani kori imain. Both say what it means to say is as follows. So halacha l'maisa, both say a villager. If a villager is in a large city, an unwalled city, they both say when does he read? Like on the 14th, like the unwalled city, and we don't care when he plans on going back, because halacha l'maisa, if he's in the city on the 14th, that's his real halacha, right? There really is no distinction with the villagers. The villages are treated like unwalled cities, but halacha l'maisa, there's a dispensation when he's going to be in the village and he's providing food and drink to the larger cities. I will say, remember again, that's like we saw, not all villages have the right to move the date of Mikra Megillah, right? It's only those villages that actively provide food and drink to the larger cities. But let's say you live in a village that doesn't do that, then when do you read Megillah? On the 14th. Therefore, we'll say what it turns out we have is as follows. Halacha l'maisa any time. So we have three cases essentially. Case number 1 is I live in Yerushalayim, but I find myself now in Tel Aviv on the 14th. So the shaila now is, do I have to celebrate Purim together with the residents of Tel Aviv on the 14th? And what's the answer? It depends. What does it depend on? Where am I going to be the morning of the 14th? If I'm still going to be in Tel Aviv, then I celebrate together with Tel Aviv. But if I'm going to be leaving that night, anytime before dawn, and I'm going to be back in Yerushalayim, then I celebrate Purim on the 15th together with the other residents of the walled city. If I live in if I live in Tel Aviv, but I find myself in Yerushalayim, when do I celebrate Purim? And the answer is, what does it depend on? Where am I going to be the morning of the 15th? If the morning of the 15th I'm going to be in Yerushalayim, then I celebrate like Yerushalayim. But if before the morning of the 15th I am leaving Yerushalayim, then halacha l'maisa, I celebrate like my own 14th, and I'll be reading Megillah on the 14th in Yerushalayim itself. Villagers who find themselves in large cities, when do they read? On the 14th, just like large cities, because the dispensation for villagers ultimately is only when they are A, in their villages, and B, when they are the type of village that ultimately goes ahead and supplies food and drink to the larger cities. Incredible. So we'll say, let's go right there. So Mehechel Kore Adon Asam Megillah. So most of them ever had. How much of the Megillah do you have to read in order to be Yosei? 3-way machlokes, right? So again, we go ahead. We have Rabbi Meir is saying all of it. Rabbi Yehuda is saying from Ishudi, from Mordechai. Rabbi Yossi is saying from Haman. So let's analyze. Tanya. Rashbi Shemayachai Omer Mibalaylahu. Both say a fourth opinion. Rashbi says, Mibalayla Hahu Nadidash Nas HaMelech. When can you begin to read the Megillah? And B'yotzei will say, listen to this. This is pretty wild. Chapter 6. Now, this is a popular opinion, right? They'll say chapter 6. Pretty much at the end of the Megillah. This is from the episode where Achashverosh can't sleep that night. We just learned about this. Achashverosh can't sleep that night. Remember, again, there's hammering going on in the courtyard. They're erecting the gallows. He can't sleep. This is when he remembers Mordechai. So Rashbi says, that's where you have, that's really the I want to be clear. Everyone's agreeing that ideally, what should you read? Right? The entire Megillah. Their shaila is, okay, what's the bare minimum? So Rashbi says from Mibalayla Hahu. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, V'kula Mikra Echad Darsha. The truth is, all four now of these opinions are actually all darshaning the same pasuk. So watch this. So but the pasuk says, Tichtov Estra Malka u'Mordechai HaYehudi es kol tokef. So we'll say, listen to this. So the pasuk says, Estra Malka and Mordechai HaYehudi wrote kol tokef. Kol tokef means tokef means strength, but it really means the totality of the story. They recorded the essence, the totality of the story. Says the Gemara, Man da amar kula tok v'shachar. So we'll say, so the shaila is when we speak about the tokef, the strength of the story, whose tokef? Right? Ultimately, again, whose strength should we record? Right? Whose strength is the dominant part of the story? So the Mandam was said, Kula, says you have to read the entire Megillah, Tokva Shachasherosh. Really, they recorded the strength of Achashverosh. So in other words, the most powerful person in this story is Achashverosh. Mandar Ish Yehudi, Tokva Shal Mordechai. The one who says from Ish Yehudi, the essence of the Megillah is the strength of Mordechai. Umandar Me'achar Dvar Ma'ila, Tokva Shal Haman. Others say, no. The real strength of the story, or the essence of the story, is the story of Haman. Umandar Milaylahu Tokfo Shalnes. And the one who says Mi Balayla Hahu, what's the essence of the story? Both say the essence of the story is the strength of the miraculous kind of underpinnings of the story. Rafuna says, Ma Ra'u Akacha Umahigia Lehem. So also it's interesting pasuk. Pasuk says, Al Kain Karu Yimei Apur, Al Kain Karu Liab Ma'ela Purim. Al Shem Apur, Al Kain, Al Kol Divrei Agari Sizos, Uma Ra'u Al Kacha, Uma Ra'u Amahagia Lehem. It's a strange phrase. Uma Ra'u Al Kacha, and what did they see about this? Umahagia Lehem, and what happened to them? So we'll say, watch this. Rafuna Darshan is this pasuk. Man Amar Kula, the one who says you have to read the Megillah in its entirety. Mara Achashverosh Nishtamish Bekelim Shalbeis Hamikdash. Why? So we'll say, how did the whole Purim story start? It started because Achashverosh decided, remember the grand feast was Achashverosh's decision to use the utensils of the Beis HaMikdash. Right? Why did he do this? Right? Al-Kacha, why did he do it? Mishum dechashiv shivim shana v'lo ifrik. He thought the 70 years had come, Klal Yisrael had not been redeemed, and therefore he felt this was cause for celebration. Umahigia elehem, and therefore what happened as a result? The Katel Vashti. Vashti was killed. And Abba said the death of Vashti opens the door for Esther and the miracle of Purim. Uman damar mi Ish Yehudi, and the one who says you read from Ish Yehudi, Ma ra'a Mordechai de'ikni Haman al-kacha. Why did Mordechai behave in the way that he did to provoke Haman? To shavi nafshe avodah zarah. Because he felt that Haman made himself into an idol. Umagia alehem, and what happened as a result? The Israchish Nisa, a miracle occurred and the Jews were saved. Umandar me'achar dvar ma'ila, the one who says you have to read from achar dvar ma'ila. Ma ra'o Haman sheniskane b'chale Yehudim. Why did Haman become so angry and jealous, literally so worked up over the Jews? Al kacha, about this mishum. The Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachave. Mordechai refused to bow down. What happened to Haman? V'talu oso v'espanav alayis. Ultimately, again, he together with his sons were hanged. Umandar m'balaylahu. The one who says you have to read from balaylahu. Mara Achashverosh lahavi sefer zichronos. Why did Achashverosh choose to bring the book of remembrance? Al kacha dizimante la Esther la Haman bahadei, that Esther invited Haman to the party of Achashverosh. Umagia lehem. So we'll say, remember we saw before, Esther's plan, according to this one approach, Esther's plan was to kind of sow some seeds of doubt in the mind of Achashverosh that maybe something was happening with Haman. And apparently, says Gemara, it worked. It worked. Haman's tossing and turning that night. Why did she invite Haman? What's going on over here? Umagia alehem tisrachesh nisa. Miracle occurred. Amar b'chabo. Amar b'char bar Goria. Amar Rav. Halacha k'divrei Amar Kula. We'll say the halacha is that in order to be yotzi the mitzvah of Megillah, you have to read the Megillah in its entirety. Va'afilu madar mish Yehudi, and even from the opinion who says that you only have to do from Ish Yehudi, tzricha shetehei ksuva kula. So we'll say ultimately again, still, even if you hold that you don't have to read the entire Megillah, you must read from a fully written Megillah. Everyone agrees you need the Megillah fully written. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Chaba, Amar Rav Chaim Bar Guria, Amar Rav, Megillah Nikrei Sefer, V'Nikrei Sigeres. So we'll say, by the way, that's how we paskin. We paskin the Megillah, you have to read the Megillah in its entirety. So we paskin the first opinion in the Mishnah, that you have to read Kuli, you have to read the entire Megillah. So we'll say, listen to this. So Amar Rav Chaim Bar Guria, Amar Rav, Megillah Nikrei Sefer, V'Nikrei Sigeres. It's very interesting. Megillah is called a Sefer, and it's also called an igeres, a letter. Nikreis sefer, shem tafra b'chutei pishtam psula. It's called a sefer, and therefore if you tied the pieces of parchment together with pieces of flax, ultimately again it is invalid. Or pieces of linen is invalid. V'nikra igeres, and it's called because a sefer has to be tied together with gidin, with sinews. But it's called an igeres, shem hetel ba shlosha schutei gidin kshera. So you must listen to this. A Sefer Torah has to be, the pieces of parchment have to be fully stitched together. Now you leave unstitched space on the top and on the bottom, but the entire thing has to be stitched. A Megillah is called an igeres, and therefore, if all you did was put in there 3 equidistant stitches, you're yotze as well. It's fine. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman lebevad shetei mishlosh. So they have to be equidistant. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, hakori ben Megillah aksuva ben aksuvim lo yatsa. We'll say interesting case. Let's say you have a scroll. So we'll say, so again, it's called the Sefer, and therefore, as we said before, has to be written on parchment, has to be written on dio, and ultimately, again, has to be sewn together with gidin animal sinews. But it's also called an igeres, that whereas a Sefer has to be fully stitched, a Megillah could just have 3 stitches, and as long as they're equidistant, you're good to go. Good. So we'll say weiter. Says the Gemara, listen to this interesting case. We'll say, let's say you have a scroll that has all 5 Megillahs in it. Right? One scroll with all 5 Megillahs. So let's say now you want to use that to read Megillas Esther. So the Gemara says that if you read a Megillah that is written together with other Megillos, lo yatsa, you're not yotze. You're not yotze. Rashi says, why is that? Diba'inan igeres liatzma. Dipirsum nisa tvei. Dechikora ben aksuvam nirka kora b'mikra. Supposed to listen to this. Because since the Megillah is called an igeres, it's called a letter, it has to be read from its own scroll. And Rashi actually says because when it's read from its own scroll, it is greater persuming nisa. There's greater publicity of the miracle. Since if the Megillah gets its own scroll, there's a greater persuming nisa. So therefore, if you read it in a scroll that has many other Megillos in it, you're not yotze. Rav Amar Rava says, "Lo Amar el lo mechasra u'miyasra porta, ava mechasra miyasra porta less lanba." So it's very interesting. So Rava says, however, you could have Megillas Esther written with other scrolls as long as what? The pieces of parchment that are Megillas Esther are a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. In other words, if they differ in size from the other pieces of parchment, then that could work. So the Gemara Levi bar Shmuel hava kakari kamed Rabbi Yehuda b'Megillah haksuva amadeis ben aksuvim. So let's listen to this. So Levi bar Shmuel was reading from a Megillas Esther that was written together with other Megillos. Interesting enough, that was written in a scroll together with other Megillos. One second, we learned you're not Yotzei. That Megillas Esther has to be its own separate Igeres. So they turn this ruling on its head. When is this so? Betzibur shanu. Ultimately, I will say, when is this so? Only Betzibur. Right? So if you're reading Betzibur, you need to read from a separate, independent klaf of Megillas Esther. But apparently, if you're reading by yourself and you happen to have a scroll made up of Chamesh Megillos, right, or of Tanakh, and you want to read Megillas Esther from that, ultimately, again, that would work. Shir hatafar halacha leMoshe misinai. Both say the Shir Taf Rashi says over here, Keshetofrin Yerios shall Sefer Torah lechavran yachad u'misharim b'tefra l'malam mata. Both listen, I just mentioned this before. If you ever see on a Sefer Torah, the entire piece of parchment is stitched together with the one next to it, except there's a little bit on top and a little bit on the bottom that is unstitched. So the Gemara suggests that shear or that concept of leaving the top and bottom unstitched, that is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But they turn this ruling on its head. No, it's not halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's logic. What's the logic? I will say, because we do Hagba, you have to give a little bit of pull on the scroll. If you don't give a little bit of pull, what's going to end up happening? It rips apart. So therefore, you leave the top unstitched, the bottom unstitched. That gives a little bit of pull. And I will say, Chasr, what it also does is, should for some reason, again, things come apart, hopefully it'll tear on the Chasr Shalom, it'll tear on the seam, and not on the piece of parchment itself. So let's listen to this. Remember again, both Moshe Rabbeinu and Eliyahu Hanavi were placed in a cave, and the Shechina passed by that cave. Right? The Shechina passed by. So the Gemara says, but in both cases, the Ribono Shel Olam, Kiviyachol, put his hand at the entrance of the cave, so that neither Moshe nor Eliyahu were able to see what was going on. And the Gemara says, because had they been able to see, then what? They would not have been able to survive. Because as the pasuk says, a person can't see me and still survive. So we'll say, so incredible yisod. Even those who get closer, which is incredible musar, even those who get closest to HaKadosh Baruch Hu can only get so close to the Ribono Shel Olam. What does it mean when the pasuk says that literally again, quoting the pasuk over here from Dvarim, right, and upon them, that all of the things Hashem spoke with us from the mountain, Melamed, Sherla Kadosh Baruch Hu LeMoshe Diktukei Torah v'Diktukei Sofrim, Masha Sofrim Asidin LeChadesh Umaynihu Mikra Megillah. So I said, listen to this. When Moshe Rabbeinu was on Har Sinai, we sometimes think that all HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him was Aseres HaDibros. But it's not true. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Moshe Rabbeinu everything, even to the last detail, even Dikdukei Sofrim, things that ultimately, again, would be introduced later on in history. For example, what? Megillah Esther. Which highlights the idea, we spoke about this concept, that it is so important to know that there's always a plan. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows anything and everything that is always going to occur. We spoke about this last Shabbos. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. That's the ultimate yesod, ultimately of the Ribono Shel Olam. Even Purim HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew there's a plan. The Ribono Shel Olam has it all choreographed, and somehow, some way, we just have to wait for the plan to actualize. Right? We just have to wait for the plan to become clear. But at the end of the day, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows Moshe everything. Incredical Mishnah. HaKol Ksher in the Kros HaSam Megillah. Everyone is permitted to read the Megillah. Chutz Mecherish Shota the cotton, with the exception of a chirish. We'll say so. Chirish usually means deaf mute, right? Shota, someone who is deranged, right, insane, and katan, a minor. Rabbi Yehuda Machshav katan. Rabbi Yehuda says a katan is permitted to go and read the Megillah. Says the Gemara, man tana chirish di eved nami lo. I will say, who is the opinion who says that a chirish cannot read the Megillah even bidi eved? Rav Nasna Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi Disnan Hakori Shema V'lo Shmila Azno Yatsa. If someone read Shema but didn't hear what they were saying, their Yotzei. Rabbi Yossi Omer Lo Yatsa. Rabbi Yossi says, no, you have to be able to hear what you say. So Bepashtos, Rabbi Yossi, who says that by Shema you have to be able to hear what you would say that what? A Cheresh cannot read the Megillah. Why? He can't hear what he's saying. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Mimai Rabbi Yossi b'diavad dami lo dim Rabbi Hudahi ulechatchila hudalo diavad shaper dami. Maybe not. I know it's Rabbi Yossi. Maybe it's Rabbi Huda, and only lechatchila chirish can't read the Megillah, but maybe b'diavad he can. To which the Gemara says, "Lo sa'adait chadiktani chirish dumya deshot evakatan." No, because also remember again, we're quoting over here about a chirish that is like a shot and a katan. Mas shot evakatan diavad nami lo, just like a shot and a katan, even b'diavad can't read the Megillah. Av chirish diavad nami lo. So to a chirish can't read the Megillah as well. Maybe not. In other words, maybe they're supposed to be reckoned as 3 independent cases. Mediktani Seifa Rabbi Yehuda Machshir Katan Michlal Dereisha Lav Rabbi Yehuda. But say the fact that ultimately again Rabbi Yehuda comments in the Seifa that a Katan is permitted to go and read the Megillah indicates to us that the first part of the Mishnah is not Rabbi Yehuda. V'dama Kol Rabbi Yehuda. Ultimately again perhaps all of it is Rabbi Yehuda. Mi dami reisha lepsula v'seifa l'kshera. V'dilma kol Rabbi Yehuda yitrei gavni katan katani la. Maybe it's all Rabbi Yehuda. We'll just finish with this. Maybe it's all Rabbi Yehuda. And there are two different types of kitanim. V'chisrei mechsera v'hachi katani. Hakol ksher in the cross of Megillah chutz v'chereshat v'katan. Everyone is permitted to read the Megillah except for a cheresh, a shot and a katan. But what type of katan can't read the Megillah? The Medrar Mamurim, the katan shall yigil l'chinuch. But maybe again a katan who reached the age of chinuch can read the Megillah even lechatchila. So we'll stop over here for today. So just know what the Gemara is introducing to us, that maybe when the Mishnah said that a katan can't read the Megillah, that is a katan shelo higia lechinuch, that did not reach the age of education, chinuch. But if a katan reached the age of chinuch, perhaps he would be fit to read the Megillah. To be continued tomorrow. Shkach Havosai. Sorry. Thank you.